Today on Better Book Clubs, my reading goals for 2024. Happy New Year, everybody. I'm here today to tell you about my reading goals for 2024. I'm sure you're thinking about them for yourself as well. So what I want to share with you is my way of setting reading goals for myself for the year, which is not about counting books or counting pages. It's about setting categories to help me read more broadly in the new year. So I'm going to share with you the 8 categories that I've come up with for myself for this year, and also the books that I have on deck ready to read next, although there's never any guarantee that that's actually what I'm going to read next. And then we'll see. I'll do a mid-year check-in and a check-in again at the end of the year, and we'll see how I did with these goals and whether I ended up reading what I said I was going to read. If you want to backtrack and see how I did with my goals for 2023, I'll post the link to that in the comment section below, as well as the list of my goals for this year. So let's get to it. So first off, I'm bringing 4 categories from 2023 over into my list for 2024, basically because I didn't do as well with them last year as I had hoped to. One of those is a category that I totally failed on in 2023, and that is reading a contemporary book in translation. And as I explained in my video at the end of the year, there's a reason that that happened. It was partly because I got involved in a project to read first David Copperfield and then Demon Copperhead, and I'll be doing a video soon on comparing those 2 books and talking about whether they need to be read together or not. Suffice it to say that that was a bit of a project for part of the fall and into December, and so I sort of neglected to pay attention to the goals that I hadn't met on my list at that point, and contemporary book and translation just totally fell off the list. So I'm bringing it back for 2024. I will say that it can be a little bit difficult to find books that have been just recently published translated into English. So of course, like if you're interested in reading the Russian novelists, you'll be able to find those in translation. But I'm talking about contemporary writers writing today in another country, in another language. It's a little bit hard to find them. So I'm really gonna pay attention to that and try to work a little harder this year at finding at least one book by a contemporary writer from another country that's been translated into English. Also coming over from my list from last year is something that I just talked about in my end of the year 2023 video, and that is reading a book from a small press. So by small press, I mean a university press or a smaller independent press, not one of the big 5 publishers in New York City that's everybody knows their names, and they publish the vast majority of the books that you find when you go into the bookstore. So again, like books in translation, small press books can be a little harder to find, but the small presses are not working under the same financial constraints that the large publishers are, and so they tend to be taking a little bit more risk in what they choose to publish, and you tend to find the kinds of books that maybe don't have a broad appeal, but that are still really important, great books. I did read one small press book last year, a book called Downriver by Heather Hansman, which is about water issues in the West, and actually like a really important book for people who, well, I was going to say for people who are concerned about climate change, but we should all be concerned about climate change. So that was from the University of Chicago Press. So I just have to pay, again, like a little bit more attention and go out there a little bit more searching. And maybe I'll make a video for you this year about how to do that, because the ways that we find books to read are very mainstream generally, and they're going to funnel us into a small number of choices when there's so much more out there. So those 2 categories I think are both really important for generally broadening not only the categories in which I'm reading, but the books that I'm noticing. There are 2 more categories that I'm bringing over from 2023 into 2024. One of them is the category of humor. I did read 3 books that I considered to be in the humor genre last year, but I feel like, I don't know, publishers really aren't putting out funny books that are meant to be funny. Or at least, I don't know, I'm having trouble finding them. I know there are certain like stand-up comedians that are doing humor essays, but I don't find that really, I don't know, I enjoy one or two essays, and then those books tend to like get really repetitive for me in terms of theme and voice. So I guess I don't even really know what I'm looking for in humor, but I'm gonna keep looking for it because I actually, since the pandemic, have learned how important humor is. I think it's highly underrated. We don't really understand how hard it is to write good humor. And I find that at least with TV and movies, that's what I want to watch at the end of the day. And the fourth category that I'm bringing over into this year is one that I like to include every year regardless. Otherwise I switch up this list a little bit, but I always want to read a classic that I haven't read before. So I don't know for sure what that's going to be this year, but I have a couple of ideas. And they're both quite ambitious. So one of them is The 1001 Arabian Nights. This is a new copy I bought quite a while ago, like maybe even 2 years ago now. It's a translation by Hussein Hadavi based on the text of the 14th century Syrian manuscript. I'm really interested in reading this, but I feel like this is one of those books that I'm gonna have to get some friends on board to read with me. The stories are pretty short. I've read some of them before, and the storytelling is not Western storytelling. So it doesn't do what you expect it to do a lot of the time. And I think it would be something that would be really interesting to talk about with other people. So if I can get some friends on board, this might be the classic I'll read this year that I haven't read before. I have another classic in mind that's maybe even more ambitious, and that's Paradise Lost. I don't even have a copy of it. I read it from my Norton anthology when I was an English major back in college. I feel like Paradise Lost is referenced over and over and over again, and I feel like I'm missing a piece of classic literature because I've never read the whole thing. That said, it's a very long poem, and that may also be the kind of thing that I'm gonna have to convince somebody else to read with me, partly to just like help me stick with it. So those are two classics I have in mind. I'm not sure I will do either one of them this year, but now that I'm putting them in the video, that kind of helps to hold me accountable for going back and thinking about, okay, I said I was gonna do this, so we'll see what happens. So then I have three categories that I'm putting in this year that I don't think I've used before. One of them is to read a book that's world history. So I know I put American history on my list one year, and I don't tend to gravitate towards history. Again, this is an area in which I feel like there are so many gaps in my formal education and so much to learn about different parts of the world. The history that I have read has been heavily focused on American history. So I'm specifying this year that I want to read at least one book in the category of world history. Another brand new category for me is something that I've been thinking about, that there are certain authors that I really love, and I've read multiple books of theirs, and I don't think there's any author whose entire oeuvre I've read. So I'm thinking I might like to expand my reading of one author whose work I already really love, at least try to fill in some of those gaps. So I don't know which author it'll be. I can imagine a few of them. Some of them more classics, 19th century classics, some of them more contemporary, writers who are writing today. It might just depend on who's got a new book out or what I stumble across, what somebody else recommends to me, but that's a new category for me, is to fill in another book by an author that I've already read multiple books by. And the third new category for 2024 is contemporary science. Science is really important in our day-to-day lives, and yet there are a lot of things I don't understand. I was not a science major in school. I majored in English, not surprisingly. I have my master's degree in English and American literature. And until fairly recently, the last few years, I wasn't even really reading very much nonfiction. So I don't know what area of science. I mean, to say contemporary science is like a pretty broad category, but that's intentional. I want to wait and see what kind of comes to me. That's sort of part of how this works, is that at least through the first half of the year, I don't pay any attention to this list. I just sort of read on a whim, whatever comes to me, and then I go back and I check my list and I say, okay, now what have I been missing and what do I need to fill in the second half of the year? So contemporary science, I don't know what that will be. With science, you want to read fairly currently if what you're reading for is information that's going to be useful to you today. And then I do have an 8th category, which is to read some brand new fiction. And I know I'm going to hit this one because I have set up a way for this to happen. I'm going to do a whole separate video on this. My friend Heather and I created what we're calling our hardcover book club. We did this because we had a conversation about the fact that we were often not reading the brand new fiction that was coming out. Even though we're both writers and we're both very interested in current fiction, part of what happens is the hardcover books are expensive, but the list at the library is a long wait. I mean, I've been on the list waiting for lessons in chemistry for weeks and weeks and weeks, like probably 20 weeks. Still haven't gotten it yet, so maybe I'll read that in 2024. The new fiction, you just have to either get on a waiting list or you have to buy an expensive book. So we came up with a concept to help encourage us, to help make it possible for us to read new fiction. And I know I'm going to do that in 2024 because of that book club. So I'm going to make a separate video explaining this concept because it might be something that you would like to try with a small group of friends yourself. But suffice it to say that reading new fiction is my 8th category. This hardcover book club is a quarterly thing, and I already know the hardcover book that I'm going to read in the first quarter, which turns out doesn't meet any of my categories, but I'll show you what it is anyway. It's a book called Poverty by America, and the author is Matthew Desmond. I saw this in the bookstore a number of times before I bought it. The premise is that we have actually set up our society to have poverty because it's beneficial to the rest of us. The jacket cover says, the United States, the richest country on earth, has more poverty than any other advanced democracy. Why? In this landmark book, acclaimed sociologist Matthew Desmond offers a new and bracing answer. Poverty in America persists because the rest of us benefit from it. So I'm really interested to read what he has to say because I live in a city where poverty is a huge problem. Through some volunteer work, I've seen it for myself. I've learned a lot about what it means to live in poverty in my city. And so I'm really invested in reading this book, even though it doesn't fit any of my categories that I just told you about. The other thing I'll just quickly share with you is the books that I have on deck. So I have a little system so that I don't get overwhelmed by my TBR pile, which is right on the side of the bookshelf here. It's now into a second stack because the first stack got so tall that it was in danger of toppling over. I have a lot, and that's just the fiction. That's not even the nonfiction. So it's kind of overwhelming. So I have this system where I have 3 books at my bedside that are kind of on deck. It's the next 3 books that I'm thinking I'm interested in reading. Usually what happens is I end up circumventing it and pulling a book out of the pile anyway, but that's okay. Or somebody loans me a book or whatever, but that's fine. Or I can switch a book out and put a different book in, but it keeps the stack in my bedroom to 3. Instead of, if you look back at my video on how I got control of the piles in my bedroom, you'll see how bad it was at one point. So Poverty by America is one of them, and I'll just show you what the other 2 are. One of them is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which you've probably heard of. A lot of people are talking about this book. This was loaned to me by a friend, and I'm thinking this might be good bedside table reading because I have to read something that's not going to agitate me and give me nightmares. It seems like this might be a good kind of meditative bedtime book, although that may mean it's going to take me a while to read it. But I've heard really good things about this. So this is on deck along with the Matthew Desmond book. And the third book that's currently on deck is Kate Atkinson's novel, Shrines of Gaiety. And this I borrowed from a friend in the hardcover book club. I really liked Kate Atkinson's earlier book, Life After Life, so I'm interested in reading this. My friend who loaned it to me felt like there was a big hole in the plot, but she didn't specify what it was, no spoilers. So I'm curious to see whether that's my experience as well. So those are the books that are on deck, and none of them actually meet any of my categories, but that's how it goes. I have these categories to keep me keep me honest, keep me reading broadly, keep me out of a rut in my reading, which I find that I fall into, and maybe you find the same thing. So I'd be really interested to hear if there are specific categories that you're planning to read in 2024, if there are particular books that you're looking forward to reading. Leave those in the comment section below. If you like what you see here, please subscribe, and I'll be back soon with another episode of Better Book Clubs.